by Iran, that if it doesn't act, if it doesn't do something when its most powerful proxy, Hezbollah, has been so badly hit, then other proxies in the region will ask, are they next? Does Iran's support mean anything? But it is an enormous gamble. There is the possibility we could have an April scenario. Iran it seems to be projecting that this is going to happen. There have been numerous warnings from the U.S., from U.S. officials, from Israeli officials, that this is coming. Israel and the U.S. have tremendous air defenses. But there is no guarantee that there will be a repeat of April. If you remember what happened in April, there was a projected attack, it was shot down, and then Israel fired back in a fairly symbolic way, and the situation was contained, and history moved on. The situation right now is very different. Israel is in the midst of a hot ground war in its initial phases. Prime Minister Netanyahu just yesterday made an address to the Iranian people in which he sort of suggested that regime change could be coming, and could be coming soon. So if Iran does take this move to impress its other proxies, to save face, it could get a very different reaction from Israel than it did in April.
Raf, you've spoken with officials there, I imagine. What are you hearing in terms of what an Iranian retaliatory strike could mean, and is it part of their considerations as they move forward going into Lebanon?
Absolutely, Anna. I think you might be able to hear the sort of rumble behind me. That is Israeli artillery fire going from northern Israel into the Lebanese border, which is just the other side of that ridge there. Israel knew when it made the decision to send ground forces into southern Lebanon, as it did last night, that it was risking the possibility that Iran would, as Richard said, feel it has no choice but to swing in behind and support its most powerful proxy, Hezbollah. According to U.S. officials, Iran has now made that decision. In just the last hour, the chief spokesman of the Israeli military went up on national television, and he delivered a pretty stark message to the Israeli public. He explains that U.S. intelligence suggests that Iran is preparing for an imminent attack. He said at this point, Israel has not detected any missile launches from Iran. He said, as you can imagine, that Israel's air defenses are at peak readiness, that Israeli warplanes are in the sky already to intercept these incoming missiles if they do come. And we are, as Richard said, potentially looking at a snapback to what happened in April when you had this coalition of American, Israeli, European nations with some support from Arab states, some of whom Israel does not have relations with. They were able to shoot down that incoming wave of some 300 ballistic missiles, drones, cruise missiles. Now, the U.S. officials who have been speaking to NBC News have been saying that Iran is preparing a ballistic missile attack. And that is significant because it takes only 12 minutes for a ballistic missile fired from Iran to reach Israeli airspace. They are much faster than the drones and the cruise missiles. So at this point, the Israeli military has not issued any nationwide shelter-in-place orders to the Israeli public. They have asked people to be on high alert. They have asked people to follow the instructions coming from local authorities. But they say at this time, there are no missiles in the air. That could change, and it could change quickly. You can imagine how compressed this timeline is, that they detect the launch of Iranian ballistic missiles. The spokesman goes up on television, and he might have to tell the Israeli public, we have 8 minutes, 7 minutes, 6 minutes before these missiles potentially impact. So this is a nation on edge right now, as it has been since those pagers started blowing up in Beirut 2 weeks ago, signaling the beginning of this Israeli escalation. And as we speak, we believe that there are right now Israeli forces on the other side of that border carrying out this ground operation against Hezbollah.
So, Courtney, what did the U.S. see to warn Israel that Iran was preparing to launch a ballistic missile against Israel?
Yeah, so I think what we should do is look to what happened in April and then compare that to what we're seeing right now. Now, in April, as we all remember, Iran and some proxy groups launched about 300 projectiles towards Israel. What we're looking at that is likely to be different this time, if and when Iran launches this off, is we expect that there will be more ballistic missiles involved. Why that's significant is even if the total number of projectiles may even be smaller than when we saw in April, the firepower that could be used here could be more significant. So we're talking about faster missiles that potentially have a higher payload. Now, officials feel hopeful, if not confident, that the targets inside Israel will largely be military and government as opposed to civilians. But as you know, Anna, that doesn't mean that civilians are not potentially in danger here. Now, another thing that is very different from April, two other things. Number one is the U.S. military presence there. Believe it or not, the U.S. has actually amped up or ramped up the number of military assets that they have in the region that could potentially protect against something like this. We're talking about ballistic missile ships that are in the Mediterranean and other ground-based assets. In addition to that, the U.S. has a pretty robust component of aircraft there that could shoot down some other projectiles that would be coming in, like loitering munitions or drones that could be coming in. But that gets me to the second thing that we are trying to figure out how it could be different from April, and that is allies in the region, whether they are going to help with the defense of Israel here, as we saw in April, or if they will even allow overflight of their countries for U.S. military and other potential allies to shoot down some of these incoming projectiles. Now, as Raf mentioned, we still don't have any confirmation that anything is actually started here. We have no confirmation that Iran has actually launched anything off. But he made the perfect point of saying that it could come very quickly. Another thing that might be different from April here, Anna, is you'll recall that back in April, the Iranian response was it came in waves. So they launched off things like drones that are slower, that would take longer to get from Iran or from some of these proxy groups to Israel. Well, those were launched first. The missiles were what were launched last. If, in fact, this is more of a missile-based barrage that we see against Israel, we're not talking hours between launch and potential impact. It's more like minutes.
Right. So, Gabe, what's the White House saying? Any reaction yet?
Well, hi there, Anna. Well, as you've been reporting, U.S. officials tell us that this attack could be imminent. And I want to put up a full statement from a senior White House official, which you alluded to earlier. The U.S. has indications that Iran is preparing to imminently launch this ballistic missile attack. We're actively supporting defensive preparations to defend Israel against the attack, and a direct military attack from Iran against Israel will carry severe consequences for Iran. We've asked what those severe consequences could be, and as you might expect, the White House not talking about that at this point, Anna. But the Biden administration is in a very difficult political position here because, especially over the last few days, President Biden has been ramping up his rhetoric about calling for a ceasefire, while at the same time reiterating the U.S.'s belief that Israel has a right to defend itself. So in some ways, it may be painting itself into a corner here. Now, the key, as you just heard Richard and Courtney mention, is that administration officials are looking to see what the scale of this attack will be as compared to April. And we still don't have a firm answer on that yet. But President Biden, we don't have any indication that he may speak later today to address these developments in the Middle East. It's too soon to tell. But again, administration officials stress that they are monitoring these developments very closely. We do expect to see President Biden later today when he delivers virtual remarks to a group of rabbis here. But again, no indication whether he might address this. He was asked about whether he was aware of these latest developments in the Middle East and aware of whether Israel might, yesterday, whether Israel might start that ground incursion into Lebanon. He said he was aware, as you might expect, but also that he was comfortable with Israel stopping. Of course, we know they did not, and now the administration must deal with the fallout here. And again, it says that it will carry severe consequences for Iran if Iran follows through with this, Anna.
So, Richard, the U.S., with that really strong language threatening severe consequences if Iran goes forward with this. But, Courtney, and we've all sort of been discussing the drone attack, the missile attack from Iran to Israel back in April, some 330 drones and missiles that were launched, almost all intercepted, 4 or 5 dropping to the ground, but not any injuries, at least no severe injuries or significant damage from those attacks. But is this time different when we talk about whether allies would participate in some kind of a defense of another Iranian attack? What is the regional dynamic now compared to then, and what would an Iranian attack now mean for this region?
Well, it has the potential to be very significant. It has the potential to escalate all the way to regime change in Iran, if you really want to go that far. And I've been speaking to senior Arab diplomats a short while ago and asked what they expect. And the answer was that they really don't know. They don't know. They expect that Iran might do something, that Israel will respond to Iran's response. But will this be the pretext that Israeli Prime Minister Netanyahu uses to launch a full-scale war of regime change against Iran, potentially with American support, at this moment of a power vacuum in the United States? The U.S. is going through a transition of leadership. Prime Minister Netanyahu seems to be acting the way he wants to act, feels very unconstrained. The U.S. had, according to 2 U.S. officials yesterday, had encouraged Israel to scale back its ground offensive. President Biden has repeatedly called for a ceasefire. Clearly, there is no ceasefire. Things are heading in the opposite direction. We are in the midst of an escalating ground war here in Lebanon. Just a short while ago, I heard Israeli jets breaking the sound barrier over the city where I am right now. There were some explosions in the hillside behind me. Israel has ordered evacuations of a large part of southern Lebanon. It is telling people to leave South Lebanon and go north of the Litani River. It is specifically told people to leave immediately more than 30 villages right along the Israel-Lebanon border. So while there are tens of thousands, between 60 and 80,000 displaced Israelis that have been forced out of northern Israel because of the Hezbollah fire, according to the Lebanese government, there are about 1 million people in this country who are displaced. And when I walk around this city where I am right now, you hardly see anyone on the streets. People are very frightened. Hezbollah says it is ready for this next phase of a ground offensive. It says that it wants Israeli troops to come into Lebanon. It says that it will be better equipped to fight them in a face-to-face fight than it has been to fight a technologically superior enemy with missiles and drones. It could be bluster. Hezbollah has been deeply damaged. All of this to say is the regional dynamic now is very different than it was in April. Israel feels much more empowered. Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is acting in a much more empowered way. He is wrapping up his ground war in Gaza, focusing now on Lebanon. Will this be the trigger that allows him to focus on Iran, which he has been talking about very publicly, including a fire speech at the United Nations just a couple of days ago?
Richard, Raf, Courtney, Gabe, thank you all. Please stay close. Joining us now is Peter Lerner, a spokesman for the Israel Defense Forces. Thanks so much for joining us. What information does the Israeli military have about this possible imminent attack from Iran?
Well, we received the information from our allies, from our colleagues in the U.S. We're following the situation currently. We have no indication that something is actually heading our way. But of course, there is a possibility that will happen. So we are prepared for any eventuality, for any scenario. Our forces, our aerial defenses are on high alert in the case that something does head our way from Iran. And of course, we need to be very, very, I think, accurate and cautious.